and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Geringer. I'm the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And we're slowly moving into the end of the year. We're putting this up on, I believe, the first full week of November. So we'll only have about 3 more episodes left. Actually, 2 more episodes, not counting this one, 3 counting this one, left until the end of the year. So we're working on getting one set up with Tiffany Lashmet at Texas A&M. So her and I will do our traditional end of the year ag law review to see what some of the big cases were. And I'm assuming this case will hit at least one of our lists and one of us will talk about it. But today I want to focus in on a case that comes out of the state of Minnesota, and it's a recent Court of Appeals case where they partially reversed the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's determination that an environmental impact statement, or an EIS, for a proposed dairy expansion was not needed. And the reason for this reversal is during the public comment period, the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy raised concerns that the Pollution Control Agency had not addressed climate change and the greenhouse gas emissions from the expansion of the dairy, and the Pollution Control Agency should have developed this environmental impact statement to approve the expansion or deny the expansion. They needed to do this EIS before moving forward on approving or denying the expansion. The Court of Appeals agrees with this, and now the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency will need to conduct an additional environmental review before approving the expansion or denying the expansion, and approving or denying the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, permit modifications. This ruling has raised concerns that other states may see similar challenges, but we're still not sure as to what will happen because this is based upon some Minnesota laws that may not exist in other states. Let's talk about the facts. Daly Farms is a dairy located in Minnesota that was seeking to expand its operation. The dairy applied to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for significant modifications of its NPDES feedlot permit. As a part of this, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency had to comply with the Minnesota Environmental Protection Act, or the MEPA. Because of the size of the expansion, the Pollution Control Agency had to conduct an environmental review required by the MEPA and complete an environmental assessment worksheet. A draft of this environmental assessment worksheet was made available for public comment, and the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy made comments that the EAW did not take into account possible climate change and greenhouse gas emissions from the proposed dairy expansion. Because of the concerns raised by the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, the center requested that the Pollution Control Agency should conduct an EIS before approving the project. The Pollution Control Agency denied this request, but never addressed the climate change and greenhouse gas emissions of the proposed project. Because of this, the center appealed that decision. So let's talk about the court's opinion in this next. Looking at the appeal, I'm only going to focus in on the decision related to the need for an EIS. I'm not going to look at some of the other issues raised with approving the NPDES permit, mainly because of this decision, it sort of causes problems with the NPDES permit expansion. But at the same time, there was nothing really new to me in that discussion. And I really want to focus in on this because this is what's raised some of the most concerns in some of the ag press that I've read. On appeal, the center argued that the Pollution Control Agency failed to take into account the effects of greenhouse gas emissions and by doing this, failed to take into account an entire category of environmental impacts in denying the need for an EIS and approving the NPDES permit modifications. In Minnesota, the MEPA lays out 2 levels of environmental effects assessment. The first is this Environmental Assessment Worksheet, which is a brief document that allows the agency, such as the Pollution Control Agency, to determine if an EIS is required for a proposed project. An EIS is a more analytical document that looks into the proposed project in detail, analyzes any significant environmental impacts, considers possible alternatives to the proposed action and the effects of those other options, those alternatives, and looks at methods to mitigate potential environmental impacts on the proposed action. In this case, the Pollution Control Agency used a worksheet that was designed for feedlots, but the worksheet did not refer to greenhouse gas emissions and did not require the dairy to provide information on greenhouse gas emissions. But in the comments to this environmental assessment worksheet, the center raised concerns that the environmental assessment worksheet contained no analysis of greenhouse gas emissions. The Pollution Control Agency addressed these comments by saying the agency did not have to consider greenhouse gas emissions, but in some of the hearings did take into account that, there was a need to potentially look at these and there could be some issues. The Court of Appeals agrees with the center that the Pollution Control Agency was not limited to the requirements on this worksheet. The center raised potential significant environmental impacts in the comment period, and the Pollution Control Agency should have addressed those impacts before issuing the order denying the need for an EIS. The court did acknowledge that taking into account the possible environmental impacts of greenhouse gas emissions would not be easy. The court agreed with the agency and the dairy that measuring the impact of greenhouse gas emissions from a dairy is not easy, but the Pollution Control Agency needs to explain something about them in the order. What needs to be explained? The court's not entirely clear. It's going to probably defer to the agency as long as it takes it into account. But we're not 100% sure on that because the agency did not do that in this case. So the court reversed the order denying the need for an EIS because the Pollution Control Agency failed to consider the greenhouse gas emissions impact of the dairy expansion. Because of this incomplete analysis used to approve the NPDES permit modifications, the court also reversed the decision granting the NPDES permit modifications. So basically, the dairy is back at step one, and they need to have these issues addressed to move forward or see the permit denied. So we're not entirely clear how the agency will come out on appeal, or not on appeal, but on future steps that have to be taken at the agency level before either granting or denying the permit. So why do we care about this? This decision shows the impact that an agency not completing a necessary process before granting a permit can have on not only on farms, but other regulated businesses. If we look at all regulated businesses in some way, they all have to go through a permitting process potentially for something. And if the process is incomplete, we may have to go back to step one. It's not always the most fun thing in the world for someone to have to go back to step one, but that's what's going to happen in this case. By failing to address a concern raised in the comment period, the agency and the farm must go back to the permitting process and complete the process again, this time taking into account the things the court has found to be lacking in the initial process. The agency may still approve the order denying an EIS and approve the NPDES permit modifications. Still, the agency has to take into account all concerns raised during the public comment period. Now, I say that it shows here they may have to come out. This case might have a different outcome in other states. Most states, not all, but a majority do not have a law like Minnesota's that mirrors the National Environmental Protection Act. I've talked about this before in other podcast episodes, and if you're interested in it, you can search on the show homepage and find some of the other ones based on the tags. I have tried to tag them in the past based on the court. The law is cited by the court, so you can go back in and search, and this should bring up a couple of cases or past episodes that we've talked about this on. The National Environmental Protection Act requires agencies to do an environmental review before proceeding with an action. Without this federal law or the state law in this case, the Pollution Control Agency may not have to consider the greenhouse gas emissions before approving the NPDES permit modifications. It's just going to depend on state law as to what's required for the agency to do. There may be other laws besides this Environmental Protection Act that require the state agency to do an assessment, but it might be wise for state agencies to at least address the concerns raised in the public comment period, even if they can't address them potentially under the law, just at least acknowledge they considered them. So what state agencies will need to consider will depend on the types of laws that we're dealing with in each state. So this may have a different outcome in another state. We just don't know at this time because it's a reported case out of Minnesota. We need to take into account what other states might have done to do this. And although this decision requires the agency and the dairy to go back and address the issues raised by the center, this might not be the final word on this case. The Pollution Control Agency may still appeal. This is a very recent decision within the past month that this has come down. At the same time, even if the Pollution Control Agency goes back and takes into account the greenhouse gas emissions, the center may still appeal that decision as well, depending on what the outcome of that, agency level decision is. This is something we really do need to take into account, that this may not be the last time we see this, and we may need to continue to watch this case to see how it plays out over time, just to see what the final word is and what we actually need to be considering. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please email me at lgoering@umd.edu, or you can tweet me at aglawpaul. You can follow me there. You can follow me on Instagram as well at the same handle. Also, if you have thoughts on future episodes, please let me know. I know I just said we have about 2 left, and one of those is the end of the year review. But, in the future, we got to have episodes for this thing. It's nice to hear what other people want to see on the podcast. But please, if you have those, again, tweet me, shoot me a message on Twitter, Instagram, email me. Send me, Morse code, whatever it takes to get it, me aware of the issue, and I'll try to follow it up and produce an episode on it. So thank you again for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.